He chose the spotlights and glory, abandoning her without looking back when the record label contract appeared, saying she was too much baggage for a rising star to carry, that their 7-year love didn't fit into the crowded schedule of international shows and photo shoots with dazzling models. She begged, cried, offered to wait as long as necessary, but he just grabbed his bags and left that tiny apartment they shared during the difficult years, leaving her shattered on the living room floor, with a heart broken into millions of irreparable pieces. 3 years later, he is topping the charts, but his career is beginning to crumble under the weight of scandals and empty songs that no one wants to hear anymore, while she, the woman he discarded as irrelevant, has become the most beloved artist on the planet, breaking records he will never reach, filling stadiums he now barely manages to pack. And the most ironic thing of all is that every devastating hit song she sings is about the pain he caused, turning his betrayal into art that the whole world sings passionately, without knowing that every word is a sharp knife directed at the heart of the man who thought she wasn't good enough to accompany him. Now he is desperate, wanting to come back, begging for a second chance that she has every right to deny, and you need to stay until the end to find out if love survives betrayal when the whole world is watching their every move, if forgiveness is possible when the person who destroyed you now needs you more than you ever needed him, and if a woman who finally found her self-worth should risk everything for the same person who almost completely ruined her. The story begins not in the glorious present, but 7 years ago, in a tiny one-bedroom apartment in a forgotten neighborhood of the city where the elevators never work, and the walls are so thin you can hear the neighbors' fights as if they were happening in your own living room, where two 22-year-old dreamers named Lucas Ferreira and Elena Costa lived, both desperately trying to build careers in the brutal, unforgiving music industry that chews up and spits out talent every day without remorse or consideration. Lucas was a singer and songwriter with a hoarse, soulful voice that made people stop and listen when he sang on the streets and in small bars for meager tips that barely paid the overdue rent. He had that natural charisma that cannot be taught, only possessed. That stage presence that turned even performances in dingy dive bars into memorable experiences for the lucky few who witnessed them. But charisma and talent don't pay bills or impress cynical producers who have seen thousands of handsome, talented young people fail miserably because talent alone is never enough in this cruel business. Elena was also a musician, but of a different kind. She played classical piano since she was 6 with impeccable technique that made teachers weep with admiration, composed complex, emotional melodies that blended classical influences with modern sensibilities in ways no one else was doing, and had a soft, ethereal voice that wasn't powerful like Lucas's, but possessed a vulnerable, honest quality that penetrated straight to the heart of anyone who truly paid attention. But the music industry wasn't looking for complexity and vulnerability. It was looking for commercial hits and perfect faces to sell to masses who wanted easy, disposable entertainment. Lucas and Elena met at a disastrous audition for a reality talent show where both were rejected in the first round by producers who said Lucas was too raw and unpolished while Elena was pretty, but not sexy enough, and her music was too complicated for the average audience who preferred simple, catchy things. And they started talking in the exit line, sharing their mutual frustration and humiliation. And that conversation turned into coffee that turned into a cheap dinner, that turned into an impromptu songwriting session in his tiny apartment, that turned into a kiss, that turned into a passion, that turned into true, deep love, built on a solid foundation of mutual respect and genuine admiration for each other's talent. For the next 5 years, Lucas and Elena built a partnership that was simultaneously romantic and professional. They moved together into that terrible apartment because it was all they could afford, splitting the rent with their shameful side jobs. Lucas serving tables in a seafood restaurant where the smell of fish stuck to his clothes and hair even after 3 showers. Elena giving piano lessons to rich, spoiled children whose parents paid well, but treated her like a hired servant with no respect or recognition of her extraordinary talent. But the nights were theirs, sacred and magical. When they returned exhausted from those jobs, they hated and locked themselves in the small apartment, turning the living room into an improvised studio. Lucas with his cheap but beloved guitar bought at a pawn shop. Elena on the 61-key digital keyboard that was nowhere near comparable to a real piano, but was all she could afford. And together, they created songs that were honest and raw, and full of real emotion, because they came from a place of genuine struggle and true love. Songs about dreaming big when you have nothing, about loving someone completely when the world tells you that you should focus only on yourself, about persistent hope even when every door closes in your face. They played shows together whenever they could, small cafes that paid 50 Rs for the night if they were lucky, university bars where drunk students barely paid attention, street festivals where they competed with traffic noise and street vendors, and slowly, very slowly, they began to build a small but dedicated fan base who genuinely appreciated what they were doing. People who downloaded their music from the streaming platform, where they had maybe 300 monthly listeners, who commented on social media with encouraging words when the views barely exceeded 2 digits, who showed up at the miserable shows and sang along even when no one else was paying attention. During those 5 difficult but beautiful years, Lucas and Elena supported each other through countless brutal rejections, humiliating auditions where producers didn't even look up from their phones while they performed their hearts out, meetings with talent managers who said things like, "You guys are good but not commercial enough," or "Maybe try something more mainstream and less artistic." Moments of financial desperation when they weren't sure if they could pay next month's rent, and seriously considered giving up everything and moving back to their hometowns to take normal, safe jobs that would kill their dreams, but at least pay the bills consistently. But whenever one of them was about to give up completely, the other found strength to encourage them. Elena reminding Lucas why he started making music in the first place when he came back from yet another rejection, wanting to smash his guitar to pieces. Lucas holding Elena when she cried after another audition, where they said she needed to be less herself and more like other female artists who were currently succeeding. And this constant, unshakable mutual support created a bond between them that seemed indestructible, a love that had been tested by the fire of adversity and emerged stronger than tempered steel. Elena genuinely believed that there was nothing in the world that could separate them because they had survived together the worst years the music industry could throw at 2 young dreamers without connections or money. They had clung to each other when any sensible person would have given up and moved on. And that shared survival meant something deep and permanent, or at least that's what she naively believed until the morning everything changed so abruptly and devastatingly that she would never be the same person again. It was on an ordinary Tuesday in March. Elena was giving a piano lesson to a particularly difficult 10-year-old girl who refused to practice and complained incessantly when her phone started exploding with messages from Lucas. Not the sweet, encouraging messages he usually sent during the day, but frantic, incoherent messages full of exclamation points and emojis she had never seen him use, saying that something unbelievable had happened, that everything was going to change now, that they had finally made it. Elena could barely concentrate on the rest of the lesson, her heart pounding with hope and excitement because she assumed they meant both of them, that some wonderful opportunity had finally appeared for the 2 of them together as they always dreamed, that years of hard work and stubborn persistence were finally paying dividends. When she finally managed to finish the lesson and call Lucas, he was so excited he could barely speak coherently, the words tumbling out jumbled and confused. But eventually she understood the gist. André Maldonado, one of the most powerful and influential music producers in the country, known for turning unknown artists into overnight superstars, had accidentally seen a performance of Lucas's at a small festival 3 weeks ago and became obsessed with his voice and presence, spent weeks trying to track him down through industry contacts, and finally got his number of a friend, and had called this morning offering a complete recording contract with Stellar Records, the most prestigious record label in the country, with a substantial budget for album production, a full marketing team, a planned tour, everything an emerging artist could dream of and more. Elena was so happy hearing the excitement in Lucas's voice that she started crying right there on the street as she walked home, tears of pure joy streaming down her face, because finally, after 5 years of brutal struggle, something good was happening for them, for the man she loved more than anything in the world, and who deserved this success more than anyone she knew. She was mentally planning how they would adapt their musical partnership for this exciting new chapter, imagining what it would be like to work with professional producers and real budgets instead of recording on their old phones and laptops, daydreaming about finally being able to quit those horrible side jobs and focus fully on music as they always wanted, when Lucas said something that made her world completely stop spinning. He said with a voice that suddenly became strange and distant, "Elena, love, There's one thing I need to tell you, and you need to understand that this is the opportunity of my life, and I can't let it pass for anything in the world. Before we discover what Lucas is about to say to Elena, a revelation that will change their lives in irreversible and devastating ways, we want to hear from you who are watching now. Tell us in the comments where you are watching us from, what city or country, because we love knowing that our stories reach hearts everywhere. And if you are feeling something for Elena and Lucas, and the complicated journey that is just beginning, leave a like right now and subscribe to the channel, activating notifications so you don't miss any part of this story of love, betrayal, and redemption that promises to bring tears and make you question what you would really do in these characters' positions. And at the end of it all, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 to tell us if it touched your hearts in any significant way. Now hold on, because what comes next is going to hurt in ways you are not prepared to feel. Lucas's words echo through the phone with a weight that Elena immediately recognizes as the sound of something irreparably breaking. She stops walking in the middle of the busy sidewalk, while hurried people push past her irritably. But Elena can't move because she suddenly feels that if she takes another step, her knees will give out and she will collapse right there on the dirty concrete. Lucas continues talking, his voice becoming more defensive and justifying with every word, explaining that Andre Maldonado was very clear about the terms of the contract, that Stellar Records is investing millions to build Lucas as the country's next big male solo star, that they have a specific vision for his image and brand that has been carefully researched and focus group tested, and that this vision unfortunately does not include a musical partner or a visible girlfriend who could complicate the narrative they want to sell to the public. Elena feels her stomach violently churn as if she's been punched by an invisible fist. She manages to whisper in a trembling voice, "What exactly are you saying, Lucas? What exactly are you telling me right now?" Lucas takes a deep breath on the other end of the line, that sound she knows so well because she's heard it thousands of times during 7 years together. And then he says the words that completely destroy her world. Andre said I need to be completely free and available. That part of the appeal for the female audience they want to target is the fantasy that I am single and accessible. And he was also honest saying that our musical partnership, as much as I love working with you, doesn't fit the direction they want to take my career, because they see me as a mainstream pop artist and not as an indie duo. So basically, the contract requires me to go solo both professionally and personally for at least the next 3 years until I'm established enough to have more control over my own decisions. Elena can't process what she's hearing. It's as if the words are reaching her through thick water, distorted and unreal. She incoherently babbles something about this being insane, about how they can't simply demand he end a 7-year relationship as if it were a negotiable item in a corporate contract, about how this is inhumane and cruel and certainly illegal somehow. Lucas responds, and there's something in his tone now that is even worse than the words themselves. There's a determination Elena has never heard before directed against her, as if she has suddenly become an obstacle to be removed instead of the person he loved. And he says, "Elena, you need to understand, this is literally the only chance I will ever get." Andre said clearly that if I refuse now, he will go to the next name on his list, and I will never have another opportunity even remotely like this one. I am 29 and getting too old for this business, and we tried it our way for 5 years and honestly got nowhere. We are still playing for 50 people when we're lucky, still barely managing to pay the rent, and I can't throw away the chance to actually do something meaningful with my music just because the label has requirements that seem harsh, but are frankly standard in the industry. Every word Lucas speaks is like a sharp blade systematically cutting through 7 years of shared memories. Elena feels hot tears starting to stream down her face, but she ignores them, her voice coming out stronger now, fueled by a mix of disbelief and growing anger. Standard requirements. Are you calling me a requirement now? 7 years together, 5 years fighting side by side when no one else believed in either of us, sleepless nights writing songs together, you holding me when I cried after brutal rejections, me lending you money when you didn't even have enough to eat. Is all of that just an inconvenient requirement that you can discard because some rich producer said you'll sell more records if you're single? Lucas is silent for a moment, and Elena hears something in the background that sounds suspiciously like another person's voice. Male and impatient. Probably Andre or someone from his team. And then Lucas returns and says with a coldness she absolutely does not recognize, "I'm not discarding what we had. I'll always be grateful for everything. But Elena, be honest, you weren't getting anywhere with your career either. Maybe this is good for both of us. Maybe you need space to find your own path without always being in my shadow. And who knows? 3 years from now, when I'm established and have more control, maybe we can revisit all of this. The suggestion that she was in his shadow, that she who was always equally talented if not more, was somehow a dependent appendage to him, ignites a fury in Elena that burns through the paralyzing pain. She responds with an icy voice, "So that's it. You are really doing this. You are choosing a contract with people you met 3 weeks ago over the person who stood by your side during the worst years, who believed in you when you didn't even believe in yourself, who loved you not for what you could become, but for what you were." Lucas sighs. That sound of exasperation he used to use when he thought she was being irrational or too emotional about something, and says, "I'm not choosing against you. I'm choosing for my career. And honestly, I thought you loved me enough to understand and support this, even though it's difficult. But apparently you only love me conditionally, as long as I do what you want." The words are so absurdly unfair, so completely twisted from the reality of who did what in their relationship, that Elena cannot even formulate a coherent response. She just stands there in the middle of the sidewalk, with the phone pressed against her ear, starting to understand that the man she loved, or thought she loved, perhaps never truly existed. Perhaps he was just a carefully constructed illusion that crumbled at the first real test of character. When Elena finally manages to speak again, her voice comes out dead and emotionless, because some fundamental part of her has disconnected to survive what is happening. "When are you coming to get your things?" Lucas responds immediately, too quickly, as if he had rehearsed. "I'll come tonight when you're at your 7 to 9 piano job. I'll take everything that's mine and leave the keys. I'll transfer my share of the rent for the next 3 months into your account to give you time to find a roommate or a smaller place. And Elena, I really hope we don't become enemies. I hope eventually you understand and we can be friends." The idea of being friends after he destroyed 7 years in a 15-minute phone call is so ridiculous that Elena almost laughs. But the sound that comes out of her is closer to a sob. She hangs up without saying anything more because there is literally nothing left to be said. The relationship is over. The musical partnership is over. The shared dreams are over. Everything is over because Lucas Ferreira chose potential fame over real love. Elena somehow manages to get home that afternoon. The next 2 hours are a blur of tears and ragged breathing, and moments where she thinks she will vomit from the physical pain she feels in her chest. She looks around the tiny apartment that suddenly seems enormous and empty, even with all of Lucas's things still there. His guitar leaning in the corner that she herself bought for him 3 years ago, when the old one broke and he didn't have money to replace it. His clothes mixed with hers in the small closet because they didn't fit separately. Photos of them together on every available surface documenting 7 years of shared history that apparently meant everything to her, and not enough to him. She considers staying home to confront him when he comes to get his things. She wants to scream at him in person, wants to make him look her in the eye and see the pain he caused. But in the end, she decides she won't give him the satisfaction or herself the added humiliation. So she leaves for her 7 o'clock piano lesson job as she always does. But not before picking up one of their favorite photos together, the one taken 4 years ago at their first show that actually sold out. Both sweaty and exhausted but radiant with happiness, and she tears the photo in half, leaving the pieces on the living room table for him to find. When Elena returns from work at 9:30, the apartment is unrecognizably different. All traces of Lucas have simply disappeared as if he never existed there. Obvious gaps on the shelves where his books and CDs used to be, half the closet empty, the corner without the guitar looking especially desolate, and his keys left carefully on the entry table with an envelope that Elena knows contains money, but which she cannot bear to touch now because accepting money from him would make this all feel even more transactional and dirty. Elena collapses onto the sofa that suddenly feels too big for just one person, and she cries until she has no tears left. She cries for everything she lost, and everything she will never have now, and when she finally manages to stop crying, she feels something new being born inside her in the ashes of her broken heart. Not exactly hate, because that would require energy she doesn't have, but a cold, implacable determination that she will survive this, will overcome this, and somehow she will prove to Lucas and to Andre Maldonado and to the entire cruel music industry that she is not nobody who can be discarded as irrelevant, that she has self-worth independent of any man or partnership, and that maybe one day, when she is at the top and he is looking up, she will finally understand how much it truly costs to discard someone who genuinely loved you. The following 3 months are simultaneously the most solitary and formative of Elena's life. Days that drag on endlessly as she tries to figure out how to exist in an apartment that is full of glaring absences, how to sleep in a bed that suddenly seems huge and cold, how to wake up in the morning without the ritual they had of drinking coffee together while playing new songs for each other. Elena keeps her side jobs because she needs to pay the rent alone now, and Lucas's money only covered the promised 3 months. But every time she sits at the piano to teach uninterested children, she feels a sharp pain remembering how she used to play for Lucas on quiet nights, how he watched her with that expression of admiration that she naively believed was genuine love, when it was probably just convenient appreciation of talent that benefited him. She completely avoids social media during the first few weeks, because she can't stand the idea of seeing updates about Lucas and his new glamorous life that is starting without her. But eventually, morbid curiosity wins, and she logs in late one night when she is particularly lonely, and immediately regrets it because her feed is flooded with news about Lucas Ferreira, the new musical phenomenon that Stellar Records is building with marketing budgets that seem obscene compared to the 50 reais they used to earn per show. There are professional photos of him that barely resemble the person she knew. He is wearing designer clothes that cost more than their annual rent. His hair has been cut and styled by some expensive hairdresser. His beard that he always kept scruffy is now perfectly trimmed, and he is posing with a confidence that borders on arrogance, surrounded by dazzling models and other famous artists at exclusive launch parties in places Elena wouldn't even dream of being able to enter. Lucas's first single under Stellar Records is released 6 weeks after their breakup, a catchy but completely generic pop song called Finally Free that has impeccable production and perfect radio sound, but is completely devoid of the raw emotional honesty and vulnerability that used to characterize the songs he wrote with Elena when they were still just two dreamers struggling together. The irony of the title is not lost on Elena, who feels every word like a slap in the face, particularly the verses that talk about leaving behind chains that held you back and finally being able to fly when you stop carrying dead weight. And she wonders if he wrote that thinking of her, or if he is so absorbed in his new persona that he doesn't even realize how cruelly specific it is. Lucas's interviews start appearing in entertainment magazines and morning TV shows, and Elena hates herself for watching but cannot stop. She watches him tell sanitized and carefully rehearsed versions of his story, talking about years struggling to be discovered, but conveniently omitting completely any mention of Elena or their partnership that was instrumental in his development as an artist. It's as if those 5 years simply don't exist in his official narrative, as if she had been erased so completely from his history that it might have been her imagination that she ever existed there. In one particularly painful interview with a popular talk show host who asks if there is anyone special in his life, Lucas smiles that charming smile that used to melt Elena's heart and replies, "I am completely single and focused totally on music now. I don't have time for serious relationships because my career is just starting and I want to give 100% of it to my fans who deserve the best of me." And Elena throws the remote control at the TV so hard that the screen cracks. Not enough to completely destroy the image, but enough to distort it. And she collapses onto the floor crying once again. Because somehow this public denial that she even existed hurts even more than the initial breakup. During these devastating months, Elena seriously considers quitting music completely, because it is too associated with Lucas and the pain of everything that happened. She looks at her digital keyboard and feels nauseous remembering all the nights they spent composing together, all the intertwined melodies they created that now exist, orphaned and broken. She stops writing new songs, stops playing except when absolutely necessary for her teaching job, completely avoids the small venues where they used to perform, because the idea of getting on a stage alone without Lucas by her side, harmonizing perfectly with her voice, seems impossible and terrifying. But there is a specific moment about 3.5 months after the breakup that becomes the turning point. Elena is giving a lesson to a new student, a 16-year-old girl named Maria, who is learning piano not because her parents forced her, but because she genuinely loves music, and Maria casually asks if Elena also plays outside of teaching. And when Elena visibly hesitates, not knowing how to answer, Maria continues by saying that she was looking at old local music videos online and stumbled across some recordings of a duo called Lucas and Elena, and that the songs were absolutely beautiful, and asking if by any chance that was the same. Elena feels her heart race upon hearing this, because she didn't even know there were videos of them still circulating online. She had completely avoided searching for anything related to their past. She reluctantly admits that yes, that was her, but that the partnership ended, and she no longer makes music that way. Maria looks visibly disappointed, and says something that penetrates through all the pain and self-pity that has been consuming Elena. That's really sad because you had something special in your voice in those recordings. Something honest and vulnerable that I don't hear in much mainstream music today. And I know that Lucas is successful now and everything, but honestly his solo songs don't have half the soul you two had together. It's like he traded substance for superficial shine. And I think you should keep making music, because the world needs more honesty and less heartless, polished production. Maria's words echo in Elena's mind for days after that lesson. She can't stop thinking about this perspective from someone who has no emotional connection to the situation, someone who simply heard the music and reacted to what they felt. And slowly Elena begins to realize that by letting Lucas's betrayal drive her away from music, she is essentially letting him win doubly, not only stealing her heart, but also stealing her voice and her talent and her passion that existed long before he appeared in her life, and that should continue existing long after he became just a painful memory. One particularly sleepless night about 4 months after the breakup, Elena finally sits down at the digital keyboard, for the first time since Lucas left, without the obligation to teach someone, just her and the instrument and the crushing pain she has carried like a physical weight in her chest all these months. And she starts playing without consciously thinking, her fingers finding minor chords and melancholic progressions that seem to emerge directly from her broken heart. The melodies begin to flow like blood from a wound that has finally been opened to drain, and then the words come, first whispered and hesitant, but gradually stronger and surer. Words about loving someone completely only to find out you were disposable, about building dreams together only to watch one person take all the bricks and build a mansion alone, about the specific pain of being erased from someone's history, as if you were never important enough to deserve mention. Elena cries while composing, tears streaming down her face and falling onto the keyboard keys, but she doesn't stop, because for the first time in months, she feels something other than paralyzing pain. She feels productive anger and burning determination, and a desperate need to turn all this suffering into something beautiful and true, that maybe helps other people who were discarded and erased, and treated as if their love was worth nothing. She works on this song all night until the sun rises, painting the tiny apartment gold and orange, and when she finally finishes, she has something raw and imperfect, but honest, in a way that none of her music ever was before. She calls it simply Invisible, and it deals specifically with what it's like to love someone who looks through you instead of at you, who uses you when it's convenient and discards you when you become inconvenient, who rewrites your history as if you were just an irrelevant footnote instead of an entire chapter. Elena has no initial intention of doing anything with this song other than using it as personal therapy, but Maria the student asks in the next lesson if she wrote something new, and Elena hesitantly plays Invisible for her, and Maria is so visibly moved that she starts crying in the middle of the song, and when it ends, she looks at Elena with red eyes and says, "You need to record this. You need to share this, because there are millions of people in the world who felt exactly like this, and need to hear someone put into words the pain they can't express alone." Encouraged by Maria, and driven by a growing need to reclaim her voice and musical identity that Lucas had no right to take from her, Elena spends the next 2 weeks recording a homemade version of Invisible on her laptop using cheap equipment, nothing remotely comparable to the multi-million production of Lucas's songs, but honest and raw, in a way that is more powerful than any professional Polish could be. She creates a new account on a music streaming platform, because she can't use the old ones that are full of memories of Lucas. This one will be just hers, a completely new start, and she uploads Invisible with no expectation other than maybe a few people finding it and connecting with it. Elena doesn't promote the song, doesn't post about it on social media, beyond a single discreet message saying she's back to making music alone. She simply puts it out into the world, and tries not to think too much about it, while she continues her life of side jobs, and trying to figure out how to be a whole person again, instead of half of a whole that was brutally severed. But something unexpected starts happening in the weeks following the upload. The song begins to gain organic traction in ways Elena never experienced before. First it's just 10 plays, then 50, then 200, and then suddenly she's receiving hundreds of comments from people saying the song made them cry, that it perfectly captured how they felt after devastating breakups, that the raw vulnerability and emotional honesty are exactly what is missing from current mainstream music. Someone with a moderate following shares the song on their profile, saying it's the most honest thing they've heard in years, and that sets off a chain reaction where more and more people discover Elena, not through massive marketing budgets or coordinated advertising campaigns, but through genuine word of mouth from listeners who found something real and wanted to share it with others. 5 weeks after uploading Invisible, Elena wakes up one morning to find the song has 300,000 plays, a number that seems absolutely surreal compared to the 300 monthly listeners she and Lucas had at the peak of their partnership. And she has thousands of messages from people thanking her for creating something that helped them process their own pain and betrayal. Elena is simultaneously terrified and thrilled by this unexpected attention. Part of her wants to hide because large-scale public vulnerability is terrifying, but another part of her recognizes that this is exactly what she needs. Not to prove anything to Lucas, but to prove something to herself, that she has independent worth, that her talent is real and important, that she was not dead weight, but a genuine artist who just needed to find her own voice instead of always harmonizing with someone else's. Encouraged by the unexpected success of Invisible, Elena begins writing compulsively, channeling 4 months of pain and anger and growth into song after song, each exploring different aspects of love and loss and self-discovery. And she records each one in the same raw, homemade way, keeping the production intentional and minimalist, because she learned that sometimes less is more. That genuine emotion doesn't need layers of production to be powerful. She uploads a new song every 2 weeks, slowly building a catalog that documents her journey from a woman destroyed by betrayal to a woman finding strength in her own voice. And each song finds its own audience, people who connect with specific aspects of the universal experiences Elena is expressing through her unique perspective. And then something happens that changes everything again. An influential music blogger with 2 million followers writes a viral article titled, "Who is Elena Costa, and why is she the most important artist you aren't listening to yet?" detailing how her music represents everything that is missing from the current industry, how she is building a career based on authenticity instead of marketing, how her honest and vulnerable lyrics drastically contrast with the empty pop formulas dominating the charts. And crucially, the article mentions that Elena was previously half of the duo, Lucas and Elena, and that she was left behind when her musical and romantic partner chose a solo contract and fame, turning his personal betrayal into fuel for extraordinary art that is resonating with hundreds of thousands of people who felt similarly discarded and invisible. The viral article spreads across the internet like fire in a dry forest during summer, and suddenly Elena is no longer just an obscure indie artist with a few thousand dedicated fans, but a cultural phenomenon everyone is discussing. People start dissecting the lyrics of her songs, looking for veiled references to Lucas, comparing the raw vulnerability of her work with the polished but soulless pop he is producing under Stellar Records. And the narrative that organically emerges in the public consciousness is powerful and appealing. The talented woman who was discarded as irrelevant by a man who chose fame over love, who transformed her pain into art that is objectively superior to his work, despite having a fraction of the resources and corporate support. Elena wakes up one morning, 6 months after the breakup, to discover that Invisible reached number 3 on the national charts, surpassing Lucas's second single, which is stalled at number 7 and falling. And there's something deeply satisfying yet also frightening about this, because suddenly she is no longer just an ordinary person processing her emotions through music, but a public figure whose choices and words will be scrutinized by millions of people. Offers start pouring in from everywhere. Record labels, including ironically Stellar Records, who apparently see no problem trying to sign the woman one of their current artists publicly destroyed. Talent agents promising to turn her into the next big superstar. Producers wanting to polish her sound and make it more commercial. Brands wanting to pay obscene amounts for her to endorse their products. And it's all overwhelming in ways Elena was not prepared to handle. She seriously considers all the offers, but something in her resists the idea of signing with a major label. She saw firsthand what Stellar Records did to Lucas, how they took a genuine, vulnerable artist and turned him into a manufactured, generic product that generates money but has no soul. And she doesn't want that for herself. She doesn't want corporate executives who have never written a song in their lives dictating her artistic direction based on market research and demographic data. So Elena does something unusual and brave that goes against all the advice she receives from people in the industry. She decides to remain completely independent. She uses part of the money she's earning from streams and downloads, which have finally reached significant numbers, to set up a small, proper home studio and hire only one person to help her. A young, idealistic producer named Raphael, who shares her vision of creating honest music that serves the art instead of serving the market. Elena and Raphael worked tirelessly for the next 3 months to create her first full album, a collection of 12 songs that documents the entire journey from the initial betrayal through the devastating pain to the gradual acceptance and eventual self-discovery. She simply calls the album Erased, as an ironic reclaiming of the term Lucas effectively applied to her when he removed her from his narrative in life. The album is released without any traditional corporate support, just Elena posting on social media, which has grown organically to 500,000 dedicated followers who connect not just with her music, but with her story and what she represents. Authenticity in an industry of falsehood, vulnerability in a world of carefully curated poses, real strength built through pain instead of false confidence based on privilege and marketing. Erased explodes in ways that exceed even Elena's most optimistic expectations. The album reaches #1 on the charts in the first week, selling more digital and physical copies than any indie release in recent history. Music critics who normally ignore artists without major label backing write effusive reviews calling the work revealing and necessary. Radio stations that typically only play songs from major labels start adding her tracks to their rotation because the popular demand is impossible to ignore. Elena is invited to perform on primetime TV shows. Major magazines want her on their covers. Music festivals that used to reject her when she and Lucas were just a struggling duo now offer main stage slots and payments that seem surreal. And suddenly she is living the version of the musical success she always dreamed of, but in a way that is simultaneously validating and terrifying, because the higher you climb, the further you have to fall. What makes Elena's success even more remarkable and satisfying, in a way she would never admit publicly, but feels deeply in private, is that it is happening precisely when Lucas's career is starting to enter a worrying decline. His second single was nowhere near the success of the first, only reaching #17 before disappearing completely from the chart. His third single, released the same month as Elena's album, didn't even enter the top 20 and fell out of public consciousness in 2 weeks. There are entertainment articles starting to question whether Lucas was just a one-hit wonder, whether Stellar Records invested millions in someone who lacked the substance to sustain a long-term career, whether perhaps the chemistry and talent he had with Elena was what truly made his music special, and without her, he is just another reasonably good voice in a saturated industry of reasonably good voices. Elena tries not to pay attention to these comparisons and speculations because officially, she is above drama, and focused only on her art and connection with her fans. But it would be a lie to say there isn't a small but real part of her that feels satisfaction seeing the man who discarded her as dead weight, now struggling while she thrives, not because she actively wishes him harm, but because there is poetic justice in someone who chose superficiality over substance, discovering that superficiality has a very short shelf life. The first time Elena and Lucas meet personally after the breakup is at a major music festival, where both are scheduled to perform, Elena as the headliner on the main stage in prime time, Lucas on a smaller secondary stage at an earlier slot when fewer people are present. A complete reversal of the dynamic Stellar Records certainly imagined when they signed him, expecting to build the next superstar, while Elena remained the discarded girlfriend who would silently fade away. Elena is backstage at the main stage preparing for her performance, when one of the festival organizers casually mentions that Lucas is nearby somewhere, and wants to know if she would be open to a quick chat. And Elena feels her stomach churn because she is not ready for this, not ready to see his face, to hear his voice, to deal with the complexity of emotions that will certainly surface when confronting the person who destroyed her, but also inadvertently liberated her. She considers refusing, but then realizes that refusing would be giving him continued power over her emotions, would be admitting that he still affects her in ways she would rather deny. So she agrees to a 5-minute conversation in a private area away from curious eyes and inevitable cameras. When Lucas enters the private green room where Elena is waiting, she almost doesn't recognize him for a second because he looks fundamentally different in ways that go beyond the expensive clothes and professional haircut. There is something in his eyes that wasn't there before. Something that looks suspiciously like regret, mixed with thinly veiled envy. He has lost weight unhealthily, likely due to the stress of a career in freefall, and there is a tension in his shoulders that suggests the dream isn't exactly turning out as he imagined when he signed that contract and discarded the one person who truly believed in him. Lucas tries to smile, that charming smile that used to make Elena's heart melt, but that now looks merely tired and forced, and he says, "Elena, you look incredible, seriously. I'm so happy things worked out for you. You were always talented and deserved recognition." The words sound rehearsed and fake, and Elena responds with a neutral, professional voice. "Thank you, Lucas. I wish you all the best too." But she doesn't elaborate, because there's nothing more to say. No bridge that can be rebuilt over the chasm he dug when he chose ambition over loyalty. Lucas hesitates, clearly wanting to say something more, and then the words tumble out in a clumsy, desperate gush. "Look, I know I messed up. I know I made bad choices and hurt you in unforgivable ways, and I'm not asking for forgiveness because I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I think about you constantly, that half the songs I try to write now end up being about you and about us and about how I threw away the best thing I ever had for an illusion of success that is turning out to be much emptier than I imagined." Elena watches him speak and feels a complex mixture of emotions. No longer the sharp pain she felt months ago, but something closer to pity, because she can see that he is genuinely suffering in ways she stopped suffering when she transformed her pain into art and found her own path. And she responds with brutal honesty, "Lucas, you don't think about me. You think about the version of me that was convenient and useful for you. You miss not who I truly am, but the unconditional support I offered when you had no one else. And now that your career isn't going as planned, you are looking back with selective nostalgia. But I'm going to tell you something that took me painful months to learn. I don't exist to be your safety net when your ambitions don't work out. I am not a consolation prize you can claim when you realize that fame without substance is empty. I am a complete person with self-worth that doesn't depend on validation from you or anyone else." The words clearly hit Lucas like physical punches. He visibly recoils, and his eyes become glossy with what might be unshed tears. But before he can respond, Elena's stage manager knocks on the door saying she has 5 minutes until her performance, and Elena uses the interruption to end the conversation. "I have to go. I have a show to do. Take care, Lucas. And honestly, I hope you find what you are looking for, but it won't be with me because that bridge isn't just burned. It's completely vaporized, and there is nothing left to rebuild even if I wanted to. Which, for the record, I don't." Elena leaves the room without looking back, and when she walks onto the stage 10 minutes later to a crowd of 50,000 people screaming her name, she feels something she hasn't felt in a long time: complete and total freedom from Lucas Ferreira's shadow and what they were together. She is no longer half of a broken duo, but a complete artist in her own right. And when she begins to sing Invisible to those tens of thousands of voices singing along with every word, she finally understands that the best revenge is not his success failing, but her thriving so completely that he becomes just a painful footnote in her much larger story of self-discovery and triumph. The success of the album Erased, and particularly Elena's viral performance at that festival, which was viewed by millions online, transform her career from a national phenomenon into an international sensation. She starts receiving offers from concert promoters in countries she never imagined visiting, invitations to major festivals in Europe, South America, and Asia, and proposals for a proper world tour that would allow her to take her music and message to fans on every continent. Elena spends weeks considering whether she's ready to take this massive step that would take her away from home for months, away from the comfort zone she finally established after the emotional chaos of the last few months. But Raphael, her producer and now close friend, encourages her, saying that opportunities like this don't come around twice, and that there is clearly a global hunger for the authenticity she represents. So Elena eventually agrees and begins planning a 6-month tour that will take her through 23 countries across 4 continents. The tour preparations are intense and exhausting in ways Elena didn't anticipate. She needs to assemble a full band for the first time because she can no longer just be her and a keyboard when she's playing in arenas that seat 10 to 15,000 people. She carefully hires musicians chosen not just for technical skill, but for alignment with her artistic vision of maintaining the emotional integrity of the music, even when amplified for larger productions. Elena also needs to learn entirely new aspects of the music business that were never relevant when she was just an indie artist recording at home. Touring logistics, international contracts, visa requirements, insurance, road crew, stage design, lighting, sound, merchandising, public relations in multiple languages and cultures. It's overwhelming, but also exciting because it represents final validation that she built something real and sustainable through genuine talent instead of manufactured marketing. The tour begins modestly in her own hometown, a sold-out show in a 12,000-seat arena where longtime friends and family and fans who supported her since the difficult days can personally witness how far she has come. And when Elena walks onto the stage and sees that sea of familiar and unfamiliar faces, all there specifically to hear her, not as half of a duo but as a solo artist in her own right, she allows herself to cry openly during the first song because the journey from tiny apartment and broken heart to arena stage and international recognition still feels surreal. During that first tour show, Elena does something that will become a trademark of all her subsequent performances. She stops in the middle of the set and speaks directly to the audience. Not in a rehearsed or corporate way, but honestly and vulnerably. She tells her story unfiltered about being left by someone who said she wasn't good enough to accompany him, about nearly giving up on music completely because it was too associated with pain, about finding her voice through the process of turning trauma into art, and about how every person in the audience who has ever felt discarded or invisible or not good enough needs to know that their worth is not determined by someone who was unable to see it. The audience response is visceral and emotional. Thousands of people crying openly because she is articulating universal feelings that many carry but can never express. And when she returns to singing, there is a palpable connection between artist and audience that transcends typical entertainment and becomes something closer to a collective therapeutic experience. Subsequent shows in different cities and countries follow a similar pattern. Every venue sold out weeks before the date. Critics in every market writing effusive reviews, not just about the musical quality, but about the emotional experience of witnessing such raw vulnerability on such a massive scale. Fans posting videos crying during specific songs that resonate with their own experiences of heartbreak and self-discovery. Elena becomes more than just a successful singer. She transforms into a cultural symbol of empowerment through vulnerability, of strength found in honesty instead of posing, of success built on authenticity instead of corporate fabrication, and particularly for young women who have been conditioned to believe their worth comes from external validation. She becomes a role model that you can be discarded by the person you thought was everything and still build something extraordinary from scratch through hard work and genuine talent. While Elena is conquering the world one arena at a time, Lucas is experiencing the devastating opposite trajectory. His full album, finally released by Stellar Records 7 months after his first single, is met with lukewarm reviews at best and cruel ridicule at worst. Critics point out the lack of emotional depth and authenticity that characterizes every track, the overproduced and polished sound that removes any trace of humanity or vulnerability, generic lyrics about partying and success, and superficial relationships that offer no real connection to genuine human experiences. Album sales are disappointing considering Stellar Records' massive investment. It barely reaches the top 20 and quickly fades from public consciousness. And there are growing rumors in the industry that the label is considering not renewing his contract when the initial 3-year period expires, that they see him as a failed investment that doesn't justify continuing to pour resources into. Lucas tries desperately to reverse the tide through increasingly desperate and transparent tactics. He posts obviously staged photos on social media, trying to look authentic and relatable. He gives interviews where he attempts to retroactively add depth to his music by explaining meanings that clearly don't exist in the simple lyrics. He even tries to capitalize indirectly on Elena's success by posting vague messages about regret and growth that his dwindling fans interpret as references to her. But everything sounds fake and calculated because that's exactly what it is. The entertainment media, which loves a dramatic narrative, begins explicitly covering the dynamic between Elena and Lucas. Articles with titles like, How Elena Costa became a superstar while the ex who left her vanishes. And the ultimate revenge, discarded artist surpasses ex in every aspect. And is Lucas Ferreira regretful? An analysis of how choosing fame over love destroyed him. And although Elena officially refuses to comment about Lucas or their past relationship in any interview, making it clear that she is focused on her own work and not on ex drama, the narrative persists because it's too irresistible for the media to ignore. 3 months into the world tour, Elena is in London preparing for a sold-out show at the O2 Arena with a capacity of 20,000 people when she receives an unexpected message from Amanda, Lucas's cousin who originally introduced them so many years ago, saying that Lucas is in a bad place emotionally and professionally, that Stellar Records officially decided not to renew his contract, that he is having severe anxiety and depression attacks because his entire identity was wrapped up in the fantasy of being a music star, and now that it's collapsing, he doesn't know who he is without it, and that although Amanda understands that Elena has no obligation or reason to care, she is worried that Lucas might do something drastic and thought Elena should know. Elena reads the message, feeling that familiar complex mix of emotions that Lucas continues to evoke even months after she moved on with her life. She doesn't love him anymore, not remotely, but she also can't completely turn off the part of her that cared about him for 7 years, and that doesn't actively wish him harm even after everything he did. She replies to Amanda saying that she sincerely hopes Lucas seeks professional help for his mental health and that she will send contact information for good therapists she herself worked with after the breakup, but that beyond that there is nothing she can or should do because her presence or involvement would probably make everything worse considering their history, and that eventually Lucas needs to learn to find value in himself instead of in external validation through fame or relationships. The show in London that night is particularly moving because Elena can feel the weight of everything that happened in the last year pressing down on her. The impossible journey from woman shattered on the floor of a tiny apartment to artist performing for 20,000 people in one of the world's most iconic venues. And when she sings Invisible, which has become an unofficial anthem for anyone who has ever been underestimated or discarded, the entire audience sings every word so loudly that Elena can stop singing and just listen to 20,000 voices carrying the melody. And it is in that moment that she finally, completely, lets go of the last remnants of pain and anger and resentment she carried for Lucas, because she realizes that he doesn't deserve even her residual hatred. He is simply a flawed person who made bad choices and is suffering the consequences. And she is a person who transformed the worst thing that ever happened to her into the best thing that could have happened, by forcing her to find a strength and voice she might never have discovered if she had remained in the comfortable shadow of a partnership where she never needed to shine alone. When the tour finally ends 6 months later with a sold-out final show in a 50,000-seat stadium in her hometown, Elena returns home not to the tiny apartment where she lived during the difficult years, but to a beautiful house she bought with money honestly earned through her work. And she sits in her spacious new living room surrounded by gold and platinum records that decorate the walls, documenting her impossible success. And for the first time in a long time, she allows herself to simply exist without pressure or expectation or specific goal, just being Elena Costa, the artist who survived and prospered and found something real amidst all the fabrication and falsehood of the music industry. Raphael, who became not just a collaborator but one of her best friends, visits a few days after her return, and they talk about what comes next, whether she will make another album, another tour, whether she will finally consider some of the offers from bigger record labels that still arrive regularly. And Elena says something that surprises him. She wants to take a full year off from everything. No recording, no touring, no public appearances, just living a normal life, recharging creativity, and processing everything that happened in the last extraordinary and turbulent year. Raphael initially worries that disappearing for a year when she's at her peak might hurt momentum. But Elena is firm, saying that she learned the hard way that sacrificing personal well-being for professional success is never worth it in the long run, that she won't make the same mistake as Lucas of letting the industry consume her humanity, and that if her fans are real, they will understand and wait. And if they are not, then they weren't the kind of fans she wants anyway. The decision to take time off ends up being controversial in the industry. Her agent argues that she is throwing away opportunities that will never return. The media speculates that she is having a nervous breakdown, or that success has gone to her head. Some fans are disappointed and complain on social media. but most understand and respect her choice to prioritize mental health and well-being. And Elena discovers that there is something deeply liberating about making an unpopular choice that serves her own interests instead of others' expectations. That sabbatical year, Elena does completely normal things she couldn't do during the tour. She travels not to perform, but just to experience new places, learns to cook properly because she always ate in restaurants or airplane food, reconnects with old friends she lost contact with during years of focusing only on music, starts regular therapy not because she is in crisis, but because she wants to continue growing and processing experiences in a healthy way. And crucially, she spends time composing without pressure or deadline, letting songs emerge organically instead of forcing them to meet commercial expectations. It is during this quiet, restorative year that Elena begins working on what will become her second album. But this time, the songs are not about Lucas or betrayal or relationship pain. They are about self-discovery and learning to be alone without being lonely, and finding joy in simple things and the complexity of identity when you are simultaneously a private person and a public figure. More mature and nuanced themes that reflect genuine growth instead of just reacting to past trauma. When Elena finally returns to the public world after her intentional and restorative sabbatical year, she returns not just as a more mature artist, but as a person fundamentally different from the young woman who was destroyed by betrayal and who channeled pain into cathartic art, but was still essentially reacting to wounds inflicted by another. Now she is creating from a place of wholeness instead of brokenness, of genuine self-discovery instead of necessary self-reconstruction, and the difference is palpable in everything she touches. Elena's second album, titled Complete, is released without excessive fanfare or a massive marketing campaign, just a simple announcement on social media and the music made available on all platforms. But the anticipation built during her year of absence is so great that the album breaks first-day streaming records, reaching #1 in 17 countries simultaneously and proving that her decision to prioritize well-being over momentum was not only personally valid, but also strategically wise professionally. The reviews are even more effusive than for her first album, with music critics noting a significant evolution in her songwriting and performance, moving beyond the raw vulnerability that characterized Erased to something more complex and multidimensional. Songs that explore not just pain, but joy, not just survival, but thriving, not just reacting to trauma, but creating an identity independent of any narrative of victimhood or revenge. Elena embarks on a smaller, more intimate tour for this album, deliberately choosing smaller venues than she could easily fill because she wants a more connected experience and less massive spectacle. And the shows sell out in minutes, proving that the size of the audience doesn't matter as much as the quality of the connection. And there is something special about playing for 2,000 people in a historic theater instead of 20,000 in a modern arena. It is during this more intimate tour that Elena finally agrees to give a long, substantive interview to a respected music journalist, something she avoided throughout her entire meteoric rise, because she didn't want her story reduced to sensational headlines about ex-revenge. And in the interview, which is eventually published as a cover story in the country's most prestigious music magazine, she speaks openly and honestly about her entire journey, but in a way that refuses to be defined by Lucas's betrayal. Elena explains that yes, the breakup was devastating and catalytic, but that reducing her success to simply a reaction to the man who left her removes her hard work and genuine talent from the equation. She succeeded not because Lucas left her. She succeeded because she is extraordinarily talented and worked tirelessly to develop her craft, and because she created art that genuinely resonates with millions of people who share universal experiences of pain and growth. When the interviewer inevitably asks about Lucas, and if she followed what happened to him in the last 2 years, Elena responds with a grace that impresses even the cynical journalist. She says that she sincerely hopes Lucas finds peace and purpose independent of music or fame, that no one should have their entire identity wrapped up in a career, because when a career fails, as it inevitably will at some point, you are left with nothing. That she hopes he learns the same lessons she learned about finding value in who you are, instead of in what you do or what others think of you, and that she no longer carries any resentment, because resentment only harms the person who carries it, while the person it is directed at remains oblivious or indifferent. The interview goes viral not because it contains scandalous revelations or drama, but precisely because it lacks those things, because Elena refuses to feed the revenge narrative the media so desperately wants, because she insists on being seen as a complete artist instead of a rejected ex-girlfriend who made a comeback. And there is something deeply empowering in the way she refuses to let the man who hurt her define her story, even when that relationship was clearly an important catalyst in her journey. Weeks after the interview's publication, Elena is in a quiet cafe in her city, writing in a notebook, as she always does when she is in the initial stage of songwriting. When she notices someone standing hesitantly near her table, she looks up, expecting a fan asking for a photo or autograph, but instead sees Lucas, looking radically different from the last time she encountered him at that festival almost a year and a half ago. He is visibly thinner, but in a healthy way this time, wearing simple, comfortable clothes instead of ostentatious designer wear, and there is something in his eyes that looks cleaner and less desperate than the last time. Elena feels her stomach clench reflexively, but maintains a neutral and polite expression. She says, "Hi, Lucas," without offering more than basic acknowledgement of his presence, and he responds with a voice that sounds different, less polished and performative. "Hi, Elena. Sorry for showing up like this. I know you probably don't want to see me, and I have zero expectation of conversation or anything, but I happened to see you here by chance and thought it would be stranger to pretend I didn't, than to just come say hi quickly." Elena considers her options. Part of her wants to politely dismiss him and go back to her work, because she owes absolutely nothing to this man who destroyed her. But another part of her, the part that has grown and matured over the last 2 years, recognizes that he seems genuinely different, and that maybe 5 minutes of civilized conversation won't kill her, or undo all her progress. She motions to the empty chair across from her and says, "You can sit for a few minutes if you want. But Lucas, I'm going to be completely clear from the start. I am not interested in reigniting anything or in being your therapist or support network. If you want to talk briefly as two adults who shared a history, we can do that. But that is the limit of my emotional availability for this situation." Lucas sits down gratefully and runs his hand through his hair, in a nervous gesture that Elena recognizes from the years they spent together. And he begins to speak in a way that sounds rehearsed but sincere. "I didn't come here expecting anything from you. I didn't come to apologize because apologies would be inadequate for what I did. And besides, you clearly don't need them considering how well you are doing. I came because my therapist, whom I've been seeing regularly for a year, said that part of my recovery process is making amends where appropriate. And although he made it clear that making amends doesn't mean that people I hurt owe me forgiveness or reconciliation, it simply means acknowledging the harm caused and expressing genuine regret without expectation of anything in return." Elena listens and observes, trying to determine if this is calculated performance or genuine vulnerability, and she responds carefully, "So, you're in therapy? That's good, Lucas. Genuinely. Everyone should be, especially people in high-pressure industries like ours." Lucas laughs bitterly and says, "Well, I'm not really in the industry anymore. Stellar dropped my contract 8 months ago, as you probably know if you followed any news about me, which I imagine you wisely didn't. And it took a few months of a very ugly downward spiral before I finally admitted I needed real help, not just for my career, but for my head and mental health, which were destroyed." Elena feels a small wave of something that might be compassion, but refuses to let it soften her defenses too much. She asks, "And what are you doing now if not music?" Lucas replies, and there is genuine humility in his tone. "I'm working in a small production studio, helping emerging artists with their demos. Basically doing behind-the-scenes work that I never thought I would do because I was so obsessed with being a star. But I discovered that I genuinely like helping other artists find their voices instead of always needing to be the loudest voice in the room. It's less glamorous, but more rewarding in ways I didn't know mattered until I lost all the superficial things I thought I wanted." Elena processes this and asks the question she really wants the answer to. "Are you happy now? Or at least happier than you were when you had everything you thought you wanted?" Lucas considers carefully before answering. "I don't know if happy is the right word yet. But I am at peace in ways I never was when I was chasing fame as if it were the only thing that mattered. And ironically, now that I stopped trying to force a superstar music career and accepted just doing creative work that genuinely satisfies me without ego involved, I am making better music than I have in years. Nothing commercially viable but honest in ways my stellar songs never were. They talk for 15 more minutes. Not as ex-lovers or ex-partners, but as two people who shared a significant history, and both grew in painful but necessary ways." And when Lucas finally stands up to leave, He says one last thing. Elena, I don't expect you to forgive me because frankly I don't know if I would forgive myself in your place. But I want you to know that watching you thrive the way you did no longer makes me envious as it did at first. It makes me hopeful because it proves that making wrong choices for the wrong reasons doesn't have to define you permanently. That you can grow and change and find purpose even after destroying something valuable. And although it clearly took you much less time and less self-destruction to get there than it took me, the fact that we both eventually arrived at better versions of ourselves is something. Elena watches him leave the cafe and realizes that she doesn't feel anything particularly intense. Not residual anger, not resurging love, not satisfaction in seeing him humble, just neutral acceptance that he is a person who existed in her life for a significant period, caused significant pain, but eventually also catalyzed significant growth, and that she can be grateful for the lesson without needing to completely forgive the teacher or wish for him to return in any capacity. In the months following that casual encounter with Lucas, Elena continues building a life that is rich and full in ways that go far beyond professional success. She develops a circle of close friends who know her as a person, not as a public persona. She engages in charity work, teaching music to young people from underserved communities who would not otherwise have access. She begins to consider the possibility of eventually collaborating with other musicians again, but this time from a position of strength and choice instead of necessity or dependence. It is through one of these collaboration projects that Elena meets Daniel Montero, a talented jazz musician and teacher who has a respectable but deliberately low-profile career. He doesn't chase fame or mainstream recognition, but dedicates himself to his craft and to educating the next generation of musicians. And there is something about his quiet integrity that attracts Elena, who has spent the last few years navigating a world where authenticity is rare and calculated performances are the norm. Daniel and Elena start working together on an experimental musical project that blends her pop sensibilities with his complex jazz, and the musical chemistry between them is undeniable, but completely different from what Elena had with Lucas, where their partnership was based on shared dreams of success and external validation. The collaboration with Daniel is based purely on a shared love for the music itself, without agenda or expectation beyond creating something interesting and challenging. The relationship between Elena and Daniel evolves gradually and organically, from collaborators to friends to something deeper over several months. There is no dramatic moment where everything changes, but a natural progression of spending more time together, discovering that they talk as easily about life as they do about music, realizing that they look forward to seeing each other in ways that go beyond professional or platonic. When Daniel finally asks if Elena wants to officially try dating, she hesitates, not because she isn't interested, but because she is terrified of being vulnerable again in that way after what happened with Lucas. She expresses these concerns honestly, and Daniel responds in a way that surprises her. Elena, I completely understand your fear and I won't pressure you into something you're not ready for. But I will say one thing. I am not Lucas, and you are no longer the person you were when you were with him. We are both adults who know who we are and what we want. And for me, what I want is to get to know you more deeply, see where this can go without rush or pressure or hidden agenda. But if you need more time or decide you don't want to risk this, I will totally respect that and will still value our friendship and musical collaboration. The emotional maturity and lack of manipulation in Daniel's response make Elena realize how different he is from anyone she has dated before, and she decides to give the relationship a chance, but sets clear boundaries about taking things slowly and not completely intertwining their lives or careers in ways that would make an eventual separation, if it happens, completely devastating. Dating Daniel reveals to Elena what a healthy relationship actually looks like. He doesn't try to change her music or artistic direction to suit his preferences. He doesn't feel threatened by her success or fame, but genuinely celebrates her achievement. He has a full life of his own and interests that don't revolve around her, so she doesn't feel pressured to be everything to him. And crucially, he sees and values her as a complete person, not just as an artist or girlfriend trophy or any other limited role. Elena shares with Daniel during a particularly vulnerable conversation about 6 months into their relationship, her fear that she unconsciously chose him because he is safe and doesn't threaten her career the way Lucas was threatened, that maybe she is protecting herself by dating someone who has a much lower profile and less ambition for mainstream stardom. And Daniel responds with characteristic honesty. Maybe you're right, Maybe part of you chose someone who feels safer. But I don't see that as a negative thing. Emotional security is a good thing, not something to be ashamed of. And as for my lack of ambition for fame, it's not a lack of ambition, it's ambition directed differently. I am ambitious about being a better musician and a better teacher and a better person. I'm just not ambitious about being famous, because I saw too closely what fame does to people, and it rarely improves their lives in meaningful ways. Elena realizes he is right, and that she needs to stop over-psychologizing everything, and just allow herself to enjoy a healthy relationship that doesn't require constant analysis, because it isn't full of red flags and toxic behavior. 2 years after her breakup with Lucas, and now in a stable, happy relationship with Daniel, Elena is in a surprising place of genuine peace and satisfaction. Her career is thriving, but not consuming her entire identity. She has a loving, but not dependent or suffocating relationship. She maintains strong friendships and diverse interests outside of music, and she has developed a practice of self-care and mental health that keeps her grounded, even when the pressures of public life get intense. It is in this state of balance that Elena receives an unexpected invitation that catches her completely by surprise. It's a message from Andre Maldonado. Yes, that producer who signed Lucas and indirectly caused the devastating breakup that catalyzed Elena's entire journey, asking for a meeting to discuss a potential opportunity. And Elena's curiosity is enough to accept, even knowing she probably should simply ignore it considering the history. The meeting takes place in Andre's luxurious office, which is decorated with gold and platinum records from dozens of artists he helped build and destroy over decades in the notorious industry. And he starts the conversation with what seems to be a genuine apology. I know you probably don't want to hear anything from me, considering that the decisions I made 3 years ago indirectly caused you a lot of pain. And I'm not here to ask for forgiveness because the damage is done and apologies would be inadequate. But I want to acknowledge that I made a huge mistake with Lucas, not in signing him, but in the way I managed his career, and particularly in the demands I made about his relationship with you. Elena listens with visible skepticism and asks directly, "Why are you telling me this now? It's not like you need my forgiveness to sleep at night or continue your lucrative career building and breaking artist." Andre smiles, appreciating her frankness, and responds, "You're right that I don't need your forgiveness, but I've learned important lessons from the last few years watching your career explode organically, while Lucas, whom I invested millions in, sank spectacularly. And the main lesson is that authenticity cannot be manufactured or forced, that trying to mold artists into perfect commercial products often removes the very qualities that make them special in the first place, that audiences are much smarter than cynical executives like me used to give credit for, and can detect falsehood versus genuineness." Elena crosses her arms and asks, "So you learned a valuable lesson from a disaster you created. Great for you. But what does that have to do with me?" Andre takes a deep breath and makes an offer that is simultaneously appealing and deeply ironic. "I want to sign you to Stellar Records, but not in the traditional way where I dictate your artistic direction and turn you into a commercialized product. I want to offer a completely different deal where you maintain total creative control, ownership of your masters, final approval over everything from production to marketing, basically all the resources and distribution of a major label without any of the limitations or corporate manipulations that usually come with it. And before you ask why I would do this, it's because I realize that the most profitable and enduring artists are those who have a clear vision and control over their work. And you've already proven you can build a massive career without our support. So I'm offering to amplify what you are already doing, not change it." Elena cannot help but laugh at the absolute irony of the situation. The man who destroyed her relationship by demanding Lucas choose between her and a contract is now offering her exactly the type of contract that would have allowed her and Lucas to stay together if Andre had had that wisdom 3 years ago. And she points this out. "You realize how absurdly ironic this is, right? That if you had offered this kind of deal to Lucas, allowing him to maintain artistic integrity in his personal relationship, maybe he would have had a sustainable career instead of a flash in the pan that burned out and died in 18 months. Andre accepts the criticism and responds, "I realize completely, and I have no defense except to say that sometimes it takes years and expensive failures to learn what we should have known from the beginning. Lucas wasn't the only artist I ruined trying to force him into a mold I thought would work. But after watching you build something authentic and sustainable from scratch, while my manufactured artists fail one after another, I finally understood that I had been doing everything wrong for decades. Elena considers the offer for several days, discusses it extensively with Daniel and Raphael and her entertainment lawyer. Everyone agrees that the terms are exceptionally favorable, and that the resources of a major label combined with her creative control could take her career to even higher global levels. But they also recognize that working with Andre would be emotionally complicated considering the history. In the end, Elena decides to accept the offer, but with an additional condition that surprises even Andre. She says that she will only accept if Andre also signs a contract with Lucas, not to make commercial pop, but to make the authentic music he genuinely wants to make, even if it's not commercially viable. Part of her deal is that Andre must use Stellar's resources to give Lucas a real second chance, but this time without trying to mold him into something he is not. Andre initially resists, saying that Lucas is a proven bad investment and that it would be financially irresponsible to sign him again. But Elena is firm. You said you learned about authenticity and how your manipulations destroyed potentially great artists, so prove it by putting money where your mouth is and giving Lucas a chance to make real music without all the corporate demands that destroyed him the first time. And if you're not willing to do that, then clearly you haven't learned anything, and I don't want to work with you regardless of how good the contract looks on paper. The condition is unexpected, and Andre argues that Elena owes Lucas nothing, and that using her own negotiation as leverage to help him is unnecessary. But Elena explains, I'm not doing this for Lucas specifically. I'm doing it because I believe every artist deserves a chance to create authentically without having to sell their soul and compromise everything they are. And if you truly changed like you say you did, then you shouldn't have a problem proving it by giving a genuine second chance to someone you helped destroy the first time. Andre eventually agrees to the condition, partly because he desperately wants to sign Elena, and partly because he recognizes that she is testing whether his declared transformation is genuine or just empty words. And contracts are drafted for both Elena and Lucas, under terms completely different from the industry standard, emphasizing artistic autonomy over commercial conformity. Lucas is completely shocked when Andre contacts him with a new contract offer. He initially assumes it's some kind of cruel prank, or that there are horrible conditions hidden in the fine print. But when his lawyer reviews the terms and confirms that it is genuinely favorable and unusual, Lucas doesn't understand why Andre would give him a second chance after the expensive failure of his first attempt, and it is only when Andre reluctantly admits that it was a condition from Elena for her own contract that Lucas comprehends the extraordinary and completely undeserved generosity of the gesture. Lucas is paralyzed by a complex mixture of gratitude, shame, and disbelief that the woman he so cruelly discarded is now using her own capital and influence to ensure he has an opportunity he never would have gotten alone. And he knows he doesn't deserve it, and that Elena didn't do it thinking of benefiting him personally, but rather establishing a larger principle about how artists should be treated by the industry. But even so, the impact is profound and humiliating in the best ways possible. Lucas spends weeks considering whether he should accept the contract, because there's a part of him that feels accepting indirect charity from Elena would be an additional humiliation. But his therapist helps him reframe it, saying that refusing would be wasting a genuine opportunity because of wounded ego, that sometimes growth means accepting undeserved grace and using it to do something positive instead of wallowing in shame and self-sabotage. So Lucas eventually signs and starts working on music he wants to make, not music he thinks will sell. The album Lucas creates under his new contract terms is radically different from anything he made under Stellar previous. It's intimately personal songs about failure and regret, and the painful process of dismantling ego to find something real underneath. The production is stripped down and organic. His voice sounds vulnerable in ways it was never allowed to be when he was being molded into a commercial pop star, and although he knows it won't be a massive commercial hit, there is an artistic integrity that makes the work meaningful regardless of commercial success. When Lucas's album is released, it doesn't make huge commercial waves, but receives surprisingly positive reviews from critics who note a refreshing honesty and maturity compared to his previous work, and slowly begins to find a small but dedicated audience of people who appreciate vulnerability and authenticity over polished production. It is the kind of sustainable and respectable career that may not make him rich or famous, but allows him to do work that matters to him. The first time Lucas's and Elena's music are played consecutively on a popular radio show, DJs comment on the fascinating narrative arc of the two careers, how both started together, how Lucas chose fame, and failed spectacularly while Elena was discarded and prospered extraordinarily, and how now both are making honest work under the same record label, but on their own individual terms. And there is something poetically satisfying about the symmetry of this journey. Elena and Lucas do not become friends, or even particularly close after both signing with Stellar under new terms. They treat each other with polite professional respect when paths cross at industry events, but maintain a healthy distance, because both understand that certain chapters in life are best left closed even when they don't end with animosity. Their past is too complex for casual friendship, and their present is better separated to allow each to continue growing in their own direction. There is a significant moment about a year after both are under Stellar, when Andre organizes a special showcase featuring multiple artists on the label, and both Elena and Lucas are scheduled to perform on different nights to avoid direct comparisons. But at a private after-party, Elena and Lucas end up having a real conversation for the first time since that casual encounter at the cafe 2 years earlier. Lucas starts by saying something he has been wanting to say for a long time. Elena, I know you didn't do that for me specifically, but out of a larger principle about how artists should be treated. But still, it completely changed my life in ways I can never adequately thank you for. You could easily have let me sink into the oblivion that frankly I deserved after how I treated you. But instead, you used your power to ensure I had a genuine second chance. And there are not enough words to express how much that means. Elena accepts the words graciously, but makes it clear. Lucas, I did what I did because I believe the system that forces artists to choose between integrity and success is fundamentally broken, and I wanted to use my position to challenge that. You benefited, but it wasn't about you personally. It was about setting a different precedent, and I'm happy you are doing work that satisfies you now, but that is a result of your own choices to finally prioritize authenticity. I merely helped open a door, but you had to choose to walk through it. Their conversation is surprisingly easy and tension-free. Perhaps because both have grown so much and been through so much therapy and personal development that they can finally see each other as separate, whole people instead of through the lens of a failed relationship. And when they part at the end of the night, there is a feeling of genuine closure, not romantic reconciliation or even intimate friendship, but mutual acceptance that they were important parts of each other's journey, even if those parts were sometimes painful and destructive. In the following years, both Elena and Lucas build sustainable and meaningful careers that are not defined by their shared past, but informed by the hard lessons they learned through it. Elena continues to be one of the most respected and successful artists of her generation, selling millions of albums, filling stadiums globally, using her platform for advocacy on mental health and artists' rights in the industry, and maintaining a healthy balance between public and private life that protects her well-being, even while operating at the highest level. Lucas never reaches the same level of commercial success, but finds something potentially more valuable: genuine satisfaction in creative work, respect from peers in the industry, a smaller but dedicated audience that genuinely connects with his music, and eventually a successful transition into producing and mentoring younger artists, where he finds purpose in helping others avoid the mistakes he made, and he develops a reputation as one of the most empathetic and artist-focused producers in the industry specifically, because he knows firsthand the damage the opposite approach caused. Andre is also transformed by the experience. He continues to run Stellar Records, but implements significant changes in how the label approaches artist development, prioritizing long-term sustainability and artistic integrity over quick hits and short-term profits. And while this sometimes means fewer massive commercial successes, it also means building a roster of respected artists who have long-lasting careers instead of quick flashes that burn out and leave destruction. And ironically, this approach ends up being more profitable in the long run, because happy, satisfied artists produce better work and generate fan loyalty that supports multiple decades. 5 years after Elena's meteoric rise and subsequent growth of both her and Lucas's careers in different but healthy directions, the music industry begins to recognize the broader impact their stories have had on conversations about how artists are treated, contracts are structured, and success is defined beyond just commercial metrics. There are academic articles written about the Elena Costa phenomenon, studying how she built an empire based on authenticity, dissertations analyzing her lyrics as documentation of a modern feminist journey through heartbreak to empowerment, documentaries exploring how her refusal to be defined by the man who left her resonated with an entire generation of young women navigating identity and relationship. Elena, at 33, is in a place of extraordinary influence, but uses her platform carefully and intentionally. She starts a non-profit foundation focused on providing resources and education for emerging artists on understanding contracts and protecting creative. She lobbies publicly for legislation that would give musicians more control over their masters and more equitable compensation from streaming services. She uses awards and ceremonies not just to celebrate her own success, but to amplify the voices of lesser-known artists who are doing important work, but not receiving mainstream attention. Elena's relationship with Daniel has matured into a deep and stable partnership. They marry in a small private ceremony 5 years after they started dating, away from the public eye because they learned the importance of keeping aspects of their life completely separate from their public persona. And although the media obviously covers the wedding, there is general respect observed for their privacy, because Elena established firm boundaries about what she shares publicly versus what she keeps sacred and personal. Elena and Daniel eventually have children, 2 over a 6-year period, and Elena navigates motherhood while maintaining her career in ways that are honest about the challenges, instead of presenting a glossy, She is open about taking years off when she needs to focus on family, about hiring extensive help, because women don't need to do everything alone, about the fact that work-life balance is a constant negotiation, not a permanent state achievement. And this honesty about the realities of combining professional ambitions with family life resonates strongly with millions of women facing the same tension. Lucas also eventually finds personal happiness, although it takes more time and more therapy and more work. He dates occasionally for years after his failure with Stellar, but doesn't allow himself to get serious with anyone because he is working through patterns he identifies in therapy: a tendency to define worth through external validation, a fear of real versus performative intimacy, difficulty with genuine versus calculated vulnerability. And it is only after several years of consistent work on personal growth that he meets someone with whom he can build something real. Lucas's eventual partner is interestingly completely outside the music industry. She is an elementary school teacher named Sophia, who has no particular interest in fame or celebrity, and who values Lucas for who he is in the present, not for who he was or who he almost became. And there is something deeply healing for Lucas in being loved by someone who knows his flaws and failures, and chooses to stay, not despite them, but as a complete acceptance of his complex humanity. The public narrative about Elena and Lucas eventually evolves from ex who left her versus woman who prospered to something more nuanced, recognizing that both are complex humans who made mistakes and learned lessons and grew in ways that benefited not only themselves, but the larger cultural ecosystem around them. And there is something satisfying in seeing the media mature beyond simplistic revenge narratives to recognize the real complexity of human relationships. And when Elena reaches 10 years of her solo career, marking a decade since that devastating breakup that catalyzed, she organizes a special anniversary concert series in her hometown, celebrating the journey and inviting multiple artists who are important in her development, including surprisingly Lucas, whom she invites to perform one song as a recognition that despite everything that happened, their years together were musically formative, even if the relationship was. Lucas initially hesitates to accept the invitation because he doesn't want to seem like he's capitalizing on their history or trying to steal attention that should be in. But Elena makes it clear that the invitation comes from a place of genuine appreciation for their time together and a desire to fully acknowledge her history, including the painful parts. So Lucas accepts and performs a song he wrote specifically for the occasion about learning through loss and being grateful for people who teach us even when they hurt. The performance is emotionally charged for everyone involved. Elena watching from the side of the stage with tears in her eyes, not because she still loves Lucas romantically, but because she is processing an entire decade of growth and change, and recognizing a younger version of herself who survived pain that seemed unsustainable at the time. The audience responding not because they want romantic reconciliation, but because they recognize the rarity of two people navigating complex shared history with grace and maturity instead of continued bitterness. After Elena, Daniel, Lucas, and Sophia have dinner together in a gesture that would have been impossible and unthinkable years prior, but which now feels natural and healthy. 4 adults who share varied connections through history, but who mutually respect each other as complete individuals with rich lives beyond those connections. And conversation flows easily about topics ranging from music to parenthood, to industry changes to future plans, without tension or awkwardness, because enough time, growth have passed to allow genuine. Elena reflects that night after everyone has parted about how impossible this scene would have seemed to the 26-year-old version of herself who was shattered on the floor of a tiny apartment. If someone had told her that 10 years later, she would be one of the most successful artists in the world, happily married to a man who treats her as an equal partner, mother of 2 beautiful children, and capable of having dinner comfortably with the ex who destroyed her, because both of them grew so much that the past doesn't define the she never would have believed. And there is something deeply hopeful in recognizing how much transformation is possible when you refuse to give up, even when giving up seems like the only option. 15 years after that devastating breakup that changed the trajectories of both their lives in ways neither of them could have predicted, Elena is about to turn 40 and has decided to mark the occasion with a retrospective album documenting her artistic evolution over a decade and a half of extraordinary. The project includes re-recordings of some old songs from her days with Lucas that she never had the rights to because they were created before she had proper legal counsel or understanding of intellect. And she decides not only to re-record these songs alone, but to invite Lucas to participate as a recognition that they were genuinely collaborative creations, even if their relationship was complicated. The process of working together again musically after so many years apart is surprisingly joyful and free of drama. They discover that they can collaborate creatively without all the emotional baggage that used to complicate, because both have full and satisfying lives, completely separate from this shared. There are moments of nostalgia, certainly, when certain melodies evoke memories of the tiny apartment and shared dreams, but they are soft nostalgia without sharp pain, like looking at old photographs of a younger version of, and recognizing that person, but also recognizing how much you have changed. The tracks Elena and Lucas create together for the retrospective album are different from the originals in fascinating ways, more mature and nuanced versions that reflect everything they learned in the intervening. The production is more sophisticated, but still maintains emotional honesty. Their voices harmonize in richer ways because they have developed techniques and depth they didn't have when they were in their 20s. And the result are songs that honor the originals while acknowledging the growth that has happened. When the album is released, critics are fascinated by the complete narrative it presents. A documented journey from initial struggle through heartbreak and unintentional revenge to eventual peace and maturity, and particularly by the collaborative tracks that demonstrate the possibility of 2 humans navigating complicated history, arriving at a place of mutual respect and appreciation without needing to pretend that past pain didn't happen or that everything is The album is a massive commercial and critical success, debuting at #1 in dozens of countries, and generating cultural discussions about forgiveness, growth, maturity, and how we navigate past relationships that were significant but ultimately unsustainable. Elena uses the promotional platform not to reopen old wounds or seek final validation, but to speak honestly about the journey from pain to peace and how both are necessary stages in human. In a final interview promoting the album, the journalist asks the inevitable question about whether Elena has forgiven Lucas completely for what happened 15 years, and she answers in a way that becomes viral because it captures something that millions of people feel but rarely articulate clearly. Forgiveness is a complicated word because it implies a binary transaction where you are upset and then you are not anymore. But real growth is messier than that. I don't know if I forgave Lucas in the traditional sense because I'm not sure if forgiveness is mine to give or he made choices that were right for him at that moment, even if they were devastating for me. And I went on a journey of healing and growth that didn't require his repentance or participation. So maybe it's beyond forgiveness, and in a place of simple acceptance that things happened the way they happened, and we are both okay now. And the answer resonates deeply because it rejects the simplistic narrative that women need to forgive men who hurt them to find, suggesting instead that peace can come independently of forgiveness through building a life so full and meaningful that the past becomes merely a chapter, not the whole. Elena continues working and creating and living for the following decades, her career eventually spanning 5 decades when she is in her 70s and still producing relevant music, though at a slower and more selective. She becomes an elder stateswoman of the music industry, known not only for commercial successes, but for consistent integrity and advocacy for artists, and a willingness to evolve while maintaining core values. Lucas also has a long and respectable career, although on a smaller. He never reaches the same level of commercial fame as Elena, but builds a legacy as a producer and mentor who helped dozens of younger artists develop sustainable. And when he gives occasional interviews about his life, and he is honest about the mistakes he made, including how he treated. And there is grace in the way both eventually talk about their relationship, not as a character flaw of either one, but as two young people making imperfect decisions with the limited information and maturity they had at the time. The cultural impact of their intertwined stories extends far beyond. Academics study their trajectories as examples of how we navigate success and failure and redemption in modern. Therapists use their dynamic as teaching examples about attachment and growth, and how the past can inform the present without defining the future. And generations of young artists look to both as models in different. Elena representing the power of transforming trauma into art and building success on authentic. Lucas representing the possibility of recovering from public mistakes and genuine growth when you do the hard work. When Elena eventually retires in her 70s after a career that spanned 6 decades, she is universally recognized not only as one of the most important artists of her generation, but as a cultural force that changed conversations about vulnerability, authenticity, the worth of women independent of men's validation, and the possibility of building extraordinary successes from the ashes of devastating. Lucas attends her final retirement show not as an ex-boyfriend or ex-partner, but as a longtime colleague and distant but respectful. And when she dedicates a specific song to him, acknowledging the role he involuntarily played in catalyzing her entire extraordinary journey, there is no bitterness, only honest recognition that life is complicated and people often teach us valuable lessons by hurting us in ways that eventually strengthen us if we allow growth to happen, instead of staying trapped in victimization. And then, Elena walks off stage for the last time to a 15-minute standing ovation from 50,000 people in a success built on talent and hard work, and a refusal to be defined by the worst moments of her life. And she looks back not with regret, but with complicated gratitude for the whole, including the parts that were because without those agonizing parts, she never would have discovered the strength and voice and purpose that defined her entire life. And there is a profound lesson in that which transcends her specific story and speaks to anyone who has ever been discarded or underestimated or destroyed by someone. The lesson that their choices do not define your. That discarding you was their mistake, not your failure. That you can build something extraordinary from absolutely nothing if you refuse to quit, even when quitting would be easier than continuing, and that sometimes the greatest blessings of our lives come disguised as until we have the perspective of time and distance to recognize that we were freed, not abandoned, redirected, not prepared for something bigger, not discarded. And so we come to the end of this extraordinary journey of pain transformed into power, of discard that became of heartbreak that eventually rebuilt itself stronger and whole than it ever was when it was intact. And now we want to hear from you who followed this journey from beginning to. On a scale of 0, how much did this story resonate with you and touch? And more importantly, we want you to share in the comments your own experience. If you have ever been left by someone who chose ambition over love, if you transformed your pain into something creative or productive, if you found strength you didn't know you had when you were forced to survive alone, because every story shared in the comments creates a community of people who understand that growth is rarely linear or easy, but is always possible if we keep showing up for ourselves day after. Tell us in the comments, what part of this story impacted you the most, whether you identified more with Elena or saw aspects of yourselves in Lucas, whether you believe people can truly fundamentally change, or if leopards never change their spots. And if you have ever experienced that moment of clarity where you realize that the person who destroyed you actually freed you to become. And if this story made you feel something, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel to activate the notification bell, so we can continue bringing stories that explore the complexity of human relationships and the ever-present potential for transformation and growth, even when it seems because we all need to be reminded that our worst moments do not define us, that we have the power to write the next chapters of our stories, no matter how devastating the previous chapter was, and that sometimes the greatest blessings of our lives come disguised as the worst betrayals until we have the perspective of time and distance to recognize that we were liberated, not abandoned, prepared for something bigger, not discarded as. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. And if someone had to leave you to pursue dreams, you were not the problem. You were simply too big for their small vision. And the entire world that eventually fell in love with you proves that real value is never about being chosen by one person, but about recognizing your own, independent of anyone else's. Until the next story.